All right, we're all set.
You know what? Actually, don't start yet.
Okay.
Is it too late? If something happened to one of my documents. So here it is. Okay, we're good. Fine.
Okay. We're good.
Okay, we're good. Well, all right, y'all. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Finding the Source. I'm Pete Carmichael at Gettysburg College, and I'm also the director of the Civil War Institute. I'm joined by Ashley Lusky. She is the assistant director at the Civil War Institute. And tonight we are joined two people from the University of Virginia, from the history department, but both have close associations with the Nau Center. And I will start with Will Kurtz. Will is the managing director of the Nau Center. He's also the digital coordinator of the center as well. And tonight, that's what we'll be talking about. Two of their projects that they have been working on. One that has been released to the public about African Americans from Albemarle County, who then went on to serve in Union armies. That will be, I think, primarily our focus, but we'll also have a discussion about their new digital project, which looks at Unionists from Albemarle County. So Will has been integral to these projects, and he also has a PhD from the University of Virginia. He worked under Gary Gallagher. That dissertation became a book. That book is entitled Excommunicated from the Union, How the Civil War Created a Separate Catholic America. And I think Will would agree. It is not much done on Catholicism in Civil War America. Will's book is really the place you need to go. Published by Fordham University, and I'm going to get the year here. I want to say 2019, 18. When was it?
15, 16, depending.
Somewhere there, 2016. The main thing is Fordham University. Again, I'll give you the title: Excommunicated from the Union, How the Civil War Created a Separate Catholic America. It's a fantastic book. Again, his dissertation. And a hearty congratulations to Will, because he has just finished his second book, a book that we badly need, and it is on General William Rosecrans. So we're all very excited to see that in publication. Hopefully that will be out in your bookstore or Amazon in about 2 years. And finally, about Will, he has his own personal website. Well, I had one as well. It didn't go so well for me. I don't know what I was thinking. It's still sort of lingering out there. People tell me it's there. And that's how I am in technology. I don't even know how to take it off. But it's there. Will's, on the other hand, is very fancy looking, as one would expect, since Will is an expertise on digital history. So if you have any interest in some of Will's projects, especially Catholicism and Civil War era, go to wkurtz.com. wkurtz.com. And I think you can also send Will some questions if you have any as well. But it's a very nice site. Will is joined today by his colleague, Liz Varon. Liz is the Langborn, is that pronouncing it correctly?
That sounds right, yeah.
All right, let's do it. Langborn Williams Professor of American History. She is also the Associate Director of the John Nau Center. She did her PhD at Yale, I believe. She started her academic career at Temple University, has been at UVA now, I'm going to say, how about almost 10 years, a little more
That's
than 10?
about right, yeah.
Okay, not so bad there. Liz has done a number of very important books. One of my favorites, it's not her dissertation. Your dissertation was We Mean to Be Counted. I believe your second book is Southern Lady, Yankee Spy, The True Story of Elizabeth Van Lew, a Union Agent in the Heart of Confederacy, published by Oxford. Your second book, is that correct?
That's absolutely right.
I'm telling you, it's a fantastic book. I've assigned it to my class. I teach a class on gender and the American Civil War. The students loved it. It's a great biography. I'd say it's a wonderful example of what microhistory can do. It is through the story of Van Lew that Liz touches on a wide range of issues about the coming of the war itself, and Reconstruction. So I'll give you the title again: Southern Lady, Yankee Spy, The True Story of Elizabeth Van Lew. It's fantastic. She's done other books. I won't give you a bio on all of them, but I want to just say one thing about Appomattox. Appomattox, the title is Appomattox, Victory, Defeat, and Freedom at the End of the Civil War, published in 2013. Back in the day, my first job in the National Park Service, was portraying a Union soldier outside near the McLean House. And I had to pretend it was 1865 every day. And we got sort of a party line from the chief of interpretation. And that party line was to tell the American people that it was here at Appomattox on April the 9th, 1865, that this nation came back together. And of course, I'm just 19. I didn't know any better. I, of course, barked that party line, as I guess so many others did. Liz's book, if I had had that when I was 19, God knows what kind of real meaningful interpretation I could have done. She hits Appomattox from so many different angles, has us rethink it. I think one of the best parts of that book is Liz's treatment of Lee's farewell address to the Army of Northern Virginia. Boy, it's fantastic. Again, I've read it a million times, but Liz really interrogated it, and you understand that Lee was twisting things, fibbing things just a little bit. Even though he wasn't the author, he certainly approved it, right? And it is, without a doubt, it is one of the first, if not the first, statement for the lost cause. So Liz's book, Appomattox, is one that you have to see or read. Her last book, I'm almost done with Liz here, is Armies of Deliverance. Armies, I got to mention this one because it is a winner of the prestigious Lincoln Prize. It's sponsored by Gilder and Lehrman as well as Gettysburg College. And Liz, I'm looking at you right now, and you're in your office, and I cannot believe it. Where is the bust of Abraham Lincoln? Folks, if you win the Lincoln Prize, you get a beautiful bust of Abraham Lincoln, and I'm looking behind you, and it's not there. Liz, I'm going to tell you something. If I ever win a Lincoln Prize, and I won't because I work at Gettysburg College, but let's pretend I could write a book of that statue. I'm going to tell you what I'd do, Liz. I'd have one of my students carry that Lincoln bust around me. Wherever I'd go, it would be behind me. I'd want everybody to see that beautiful Lincoln Prize, but you're just too modest, Liz.
That Lincoln bust is 85 pounds, and I could have him behind me photobombing me for everything I do from here on out, but he's in the living room where, he can be enjoyed by all who enter our residence.
Your apartment, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, well, you know what? Congratulations on that. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to Gettysburg College. It's a wonderful thing that you all sponsor this prize.
All right. So I'm going to let, I think, Ashley go ahead and get us started on our conversation tonight. Folks at home, as you know, feel free, type a question, and we, of course, will, try to do it right here on the spot instead of waiting to the end. So, Ashley, if you'd like to go ahead and get us going, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, we're excited to have you guys talk to us tonight because this is so different from what we usually do with having historians on talking about a monograph or, a piece of scholarship that's in process, in a traditional book form. But what you all have is two digital humanities projects that are definitely of equal significance, of equal importance for a monograph, but they're going to be very accessible right off the bat. They've already launched, both of them, and they're accessible to a wide range of audiences and a wide range of educators and researchers. And I think our audiences love to see kind of the behind the scenes of the historian's craft of putting together, what does it take to either put together a book or, an article, or in this case, to, curate one of these digital humanities projects. So I think we'd like to start by just asking you all where this project got its roots. Where did it start? What was the inspiration for it? What was the need for it that you all saw? And how did it kind of take off from those early conversations?
Those are great questions. I'll start us off and then pass the baton to Will, who was really the mastermind of seeing this project to fruition and deserves all the credit in the world for that. As Pete alluded to, the subject of Southern Unionism is one that's been central to my work. The biography of Elizabeth Van Lew, the Unionist, focused on that theme. The Armies of Deliverance is certainly concerned with the theme of the ways that the Republican Party and then the Lincoln administration were preoccupied with Southern Unionism, with the work of trying to bring what they hoped and imagined was a latent Southern Unionism to the fore. And so that's a longstanding interest for me. I found myself here at UVA at a moment when the university's in the midst of this reckoning with its past, its connections to slavery as an institution, as so many universities are doing, grappling with, reckoning with local history, trying to reimagine local history, as Pete's own work has shown in his his scholarship. Universities like UVA were hotbeds of secessionism in 1860-61, and UVA's Civil War story has been traditionally told as a story of Confederates in the Confederacy, of students rushing off to join the Confederate Army for reasons that Pete's work helps to explain. For a long time, that stood as Albemarle counties as the regional Civil War story, the story of those UVA students and alums by the hundreds, and altogether 3,000 alums fighting for the Confederacy. So our projects here on unionism in the region are meant to rethink and reconceptualize local history, and they began with a sort of accidental discovery. Again, a big theme for us here is that these digital projects and the availability of sources and leads online just open so many doors for us. I was doing some USCT research on United States colored troops, and I found online someone, I think in a Missouri archive, had put together and then posted a list of African-American recruits into the USCT in Missouri and listed their birthplaces. And it just caught my eye that there was an Albemarle County birthplace there. And it made me wonder. And then I kept looking through that particular document. Again, bless the person who did the work to put that together and put it up there. I kept looking at that document. There were more Albemarle names and Central Virginia names. And it just made me curious about whether there was a USCT story in Albemarle. The Union Army doesn't arrive here in this county until the very last days of the war. The town is occupied / liberated, depending on your perspective, in March of 1865. So there's no USCT recruiting here during the war, but here were these birthplaces. So I passed this information along to Will Kurtz, our Nau Center's digital historian, and we along with Gary Gallagher, decided to dig into this and see if, this Missouri list was a fluke or the tip of an iceberg. And what Will discovered, in conjunction with a team of research assistants he very deftly mobilized, was that it was the tip of an iceberg. I'll sort of pass the baton to Will there.
I just got a quick question. Will, how many bottles of Malbec wine did you have to give Gary Gallagher to agree to a digital project? I mean, was it a case full, or did you just, after a long evening, he didn't know what he was signing on to?
I dragged into a number of meetings with digital folks, and I'm sure I didn't give him enough. Yeah, but I remember when the Nau Center created a Twitter account, and Kevin Levin says, "Is Gary tweeting?" I'm like, "No, of course not."
You could put a gun to Gary Gallagher's head, and he still would not tweet. He just.
This was a collective effort, and Will's been so key in being the public-facing part of it. But I think we did, although neither Gary or I have any digital humanities skills per se, I think we did recognize, just by using and experiencing all the valuable digital projects out there, including the Valley of the Shadow, which Ed Ayers started at UVA, that these are wonderful projects for a new center like ours to make a mark and contribute and reach people beyond the people who are able to come to one of our events or whatever,
Yeah, and my job before the Nau Center was working at what is now Virginia Humanities, and we had a large grant from the National Archives to help digitize about 50,000 letters written by some of the founding fathers. That became a website called Founders Online, which is sort of like Google.com for the founding era in many ways, completely free site. So with that experience, working with a large staff underneath me, and seeing the value of giving people a digital resource that's free, that's a really important thing, especially now that we're finding out now, right, with all the archives being closed. It's so important to give people open access to things. This project I sort of modeled after what we did successfully back at Virginia Humanities. And we had so many undergraduate students. It wouldn't have been possible without the undergraduate students. They really did a ton of work to help us out. Building off of the work that Liz did on her list, we combed through everything we could find online. So the first 55 USCT regiments, plus all the cavalry and artillery regiments, are searchable by birthplace on Ancestry.com. Now, some of the spellings of Charlottesville and Albemarle are so wildly off that you have to basically look for every single person born in Virginia to make sure you find them all, and which I did. And of course, all of the African-American sailors, there's a wonderful database that Joseph Reedy did at Howard University that's at the National Park Service website. Now you can search that by birthplace as well. So that the sailors are pretty easy, but for those other regiments that weren't searchable by birthplace, I went to the National Archives for a week and just paged through descriptive regimental records nonstop. But I think I ate lunch like once, and I just went through them and eventually came up with all of these names: 256 individuals, 250 soldiers, 6 sailors, and the problem with some of those records is that they're not always accurate. So local historians, once they heard about our project, were very kind in saying, "Hey, did you know about this soldier? He's says he's born in New Orleans according to his service record, but no, he's from Charlottesville, and let me tell you about him." So our most recent soldier actually fits that description, Joseph Carr, number 256. And so it's a combination of searching through those digital records, searching through the National Archives, and local historians helping us out that let us find all of these individuals. And then it was a lot of work to go through and populate a database, and the undergraduates were key in that. I really wanted the undergraduates to have an experience of publishing something for themselves, like not just writing an essay for a class that they get a grade and it never sees the light of day, but they got to help out by writing biographies, by writing essays, by transcribing primary sources, by doing all kinds, pretty much everything, except for the final quality control work and some of the archival work. So I was really pleased with how well they did, and they stepped up to the plate, and they just did some really amazing work for us. We had a smaller team of graduate students who also were very key. First among them, Brian Newman, who did a lot of work on this project, but especially on the UVA Unionist project, did an absolute ton of work on that particular digital project.
So I know you both are going to walk us through the site here in just a moment. And I just want to mention that Ashley, she is the point person for our digital project entitled Killed at Gettysburg. And it's the students, the foundational research, I should say, that the students use come from the National Archives. It's a compiled service record. And what they do is they do a mini biography. It's microhistory. And Ashley has done a wonderful job of working very closely with them to ensure that these individual stories, that they have that deep context to give, again, their lives a kind of historical and cultural meaning that I think is valuable for the people who visit Killed at Gettysburg. In fact, part of the site is that you can follow the soldier across the battlefield. The student/author takes pictures, right? So that someone who lives out in California who might not be able to get to Gettysburg will get a sense of the place, of the physical place, and then they'll get this fantastic story. And like at UVA, we've had wonderful success in using our students, right? They start to practice their craft.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
People said about broad context, leads me to want to make two sort of broad points before we look at the website, because having these points in mind will help people appreciate all of the various uses to which the website can be put. The stakes of this recovery and discovery of unionism and bringing it to the fore are pretty high. Southern unionism is a subject that lost cause, memory tradition, is which you alluded to, Lee's farewell address and so on, has tried to sort of sweep under the rug. So it's bringing into focus a part of Southern history that lost cause mythology with its kind of solid South propaganda really ignored. But ultimately, to be reminded of the presence of these Southern Unionists is to be reminded that we shouldn't equate the South with the Confederacy. In a shorthand, we all do it. The North won, the South lost, but we shouldn't. I wrote the Van Loo book about this underground cell, interracial unionist cell in Richmond. and I thought, that I had a pretty good read on Southern Unionism. Then Bill Freeling's The South versus the South came out. What a book. I mean, there's no book that's left my jaw on the floor, that I've read in the past 20 years more than that book, with his amazing statistics about 200,000 border South whites fighting for the Union Army from slaveholding states, 100,000 whites from Confederate states fighting for the Union Army, and 150,000 African Americans from the South fighting for the Union Army, and that all confounds our notion that we can equate the South with the Confederacy, as he puts it in the memorable title. On some levels, it was a war of the South versus the South. And the other kind of broad point of context, which Will's demonstration of the website will really sort of bring into sharp relief, is that fundamentally, the story of these Albemarle men is a story of a kind of Virginia diaspora. Usually when we sort of reckon the geographical, try to classify USCT regiments geographically, it's by where they enlisted. None of our men in our samples, 256, enlisted in Albemarle County, Virginia. They enlisted in 95 different regiments across the landscape of the Union War because they were dispersed from Virginia. They were dispersed by the domestic slave trade, of which Virginia was the principal engine, and Albemarle County was a major exporter in that grim and horrific industry. They were dispersed by forced migration, masters who moved in search of lands in Missouri and elsewhere. They were dispersed by flight, but the upshot is that from our sample, we've gleaned that if you looked at birthplace, not site of recruitment, as your way of thinking about the geography of the USCT, you would find that there are many more Virginia-born men in the USCT than our numbers suggest. I think that the way people think about it these days is that most USCT recruits came from Louisiana, 24,000, and only 5,000 from Virginia. If you counted birthplace, that figure would look very, very different. So part of this is about saying this is a story of movement and dispersal.
And to add to that, only over 90% of our men enlisted outside of the Old Dominion. Only about 16 of them enlisted within the borders of Virginia before the war, so including West Virginia. So I don't think that figure would hold for every county in Virginia, but if you did a study of the other counties, there have to be thousands and thousands of more stories to tell.
Will, could you just very quickly help our audience understand, because I was struck by that. I played around on the database, and I think there was only one soldier that I could find who was living in Albemarle County and enlisted in the USCT regiment. He obviously did not do that in Albemarle County. Just quickly sort of explain that, because I worry that some people might say, wow, it appears that the institution of slavery in Albemarle County was a fairly stable one. How would you respond to that if someone said, hey, look, you don't see Black folks there enlisting? How would you respond to that?
Go ahead, Will.
You can go, Liz, if you want to.
I mean, we do have many cases of people fleeing from masters and making it to Union lines within Virginia. Just to give an example, a couple examples that underscore that the slave trade, which was profoundly to Black families and communities, profoundly destabilizing institution that they fought back against in a sort of wide range of forms of resistance, of which flight is the most salient here. We have cases like Solomon Perkins, a young man, a boy at the time, born in Albemarle County, bequeathed at his master's death to another owner. The owner moves to a different Virginia county, and Perkins, as the Union is raiding the railroads in that county, Louisa County, flees to the Union Army and eventually enlists in Washington, D.C. So there's a couple, to answer your sort of question, Pete, and I'll draw on the work of Thavolia Glimpf here too. Wherever there are opportunities, the chances of a successful slave flight are very low. If the Union Army's proximity raises the chances people will take that chance.
Right.
But as Thavolia Glimpf has reminded us, even in places that the Union Army doesn't penetrate, where people can't take that chance, they find other ways to undermine and destabilize slavery through resistance. So we have to keep both the resistance of those who fled and the resistance of those who stayed behind in our frame at all times. But we do have many examples in our sample of men who fled to Union lines. And in a sense, the third big takeaway here, in addition to the 2 points I made earlier, is that, and in our recent rollout, Amy Morrell Taylor sort of underscored this and pointed it out to me. I hadn't thought about it in this way. But a big message of our project is that the stories of these Black soldiers, we shouldn't begin with their recruitment moment. They're signing up the enlistment papers. The stories begin far before that, because just getting to the Army was an ordeal. Absolutely. So, then being in the Army, fighting in the Army, taking on all the risks of soldiering is an ordeal. But just getting there was an ordeal, because there were so many ways Confederates tried to deter, punish, etc. Those who attempted to make that.
Absolutely. I'm glad you explained that, Liz. And before I turn it back over to Ashley, I would just also make the obvious point that I think that you are stating, and that is for an enslaved individuals who live in areas of the South that are not penetrated by Union armies, like you said, the great challenge and the great risk. I think the thing for us to continue to think about is that it's either resistance or accommodation. And I think that maybe there's something in the middle there where it's about survival. It's about surviving within a situation. I mean, slaves, they're thinking in a very situational way. And I think that we feel this pressure to always frame things as acts of resistance, but maybe it should be seen as acts of survival. There's a fantastic book on Nat Turner's Rebellion. Patrick Breen, I think it's Patrick is his first name. It's fantastic, and I would just encourage anyone who has any interest in slavery, the study of slavery, that they should absolutely.
And that theme of survival is key, Pete. And I mean, I think as we talk about the website, we'll see that every one of these 256 stories are stories of survival or attempted survival, and that pension records in particular get at the sagas of survival that each of these soldiers represent.
Absolutely. Actually, did you have some questions here before that we can start to look at some of the sites?
So I just wanted to kind of add on to going back to the idea of Southern Unionism as a whole, and the framing of orienting visitor or viewers before they approach the website. I think a lot of people, when they think about Southern Unionism, they think of kind of the iconic key pockets of the South, that it's Eastern Tennessee, that it's the mountainous regions of North Carolina. And what you're showing here is that even those places that, we kind of identify as, well, they clearly would be, pro-Confederate, Shenandoah Valley area, even Richmond itself, the capital of the Confederacy, in the city, around the city, had these pockets that were there. Now, whether or not that they were hugely influential in the big, game-changing ways that someone like Elizabeth Van Lew definitely was, that's a different story, but just the complexity that adds, I think is important. And the fact that these Unionists, as you already mentioned, or alluded to, they're signing on to the union cause for all different reasons. Maybe they're, temporary Unionists, or maybe they're kind of ambivalent Unionists, or Unionists one day and, pro-Confederate the next day, whatever's going to, best benefit them, not necessarily that they're aligning with an ideology or a political cause, but that they're, again, kind of the idea of pragmatism and survival. They're signing on with the war effort. Which is, I think, another good, framing device that you're using for that particular project.
Yeah, and it's important in that sense to distinguish between the two projects. Black Southern Unionism was pervasive, and again, Glimpf and others have shown that we have to appreciate women's unionism, not only the unionism of those who put on uniforms. Among Southern whites, unionism, as you've said, there were pockets of it, but we find it in surprising places. There was never as much of it as the Union would have liked. Right. But there was enough of it to really, confound and distract the Confederacy.
Sure.
And to surprise us, in ways that our UVA Unionists are really very surprising.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to add that as before we dive into the site. But I think it would be a good idea to probably go to the site, right, Pete? And,
sure, absolutely.
And have you guys walk us through. So, Will, if you want to screen share that, I can get it up on the screen and start going through.
I just sent out the link to everybody in case they're curious. The UVA Unionist, before I start, the UVA Unionist website will launch next Tuesday on May 4th. And so we're going to just look at Black Virginians in Blue, but we can talk a little bit more about UVA Unionists as well if we want to. But a lot of the themes, Ashley, you just spoke about it's pretty much to a T describes some of our guys, some of our UVA Unionists. All right. All right. Can you see my screen now?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So here's the website, Black Virginians in Blue. I need to, first just quick little shout out to the Jefferson Trust for helping to fund this project. Thank you so much, everyone at the Trust and at the Alumni Association of the University of Virginia. And also thank you to the Institute for Advanced Technology and the Humanities, IF, which built this website for us. So when you come to the website, I've kind of zoomed in a little bit so you can't quite see everything on the home page here just to get the text a little bit bigger. We suggest that you start off with some of our overview essays that our students have written, and then before you get into some of the other features. But I'll go through the features of the website just for everybody's, so you can see what's going on here. So the first part of the website is this database. It's driven by this database that we worked on for so long, and it allows you to come in here and say, for a local folks that they wanted to see if one of their ancestors was in the USET, for example, we can search for the last name Taylor. They can search for soldier versus sailor. They can search for a variety of things about occupation, where the soldier enlisted, if they died in the service, applied for pension, etc. Let me just go to start off here first with a search for Taylor, and this is going to bring up everyone with the last name of Taylor. If it says with essay, that means that there's an actual essay as opposed to just sort of a database record. And it was really important to me that this is not just a Civil War history. This is a social history. This is a history of Albemarle County African Americans throughout the 19th century. So we wrote biographies for not just the soldiers and sailors, but for their spouses as well. And if we go in here, this is James T.S. Taylor. He is the most famous of our Black Virginians in Blue. He was a prominent Black political leader in Charlottesville after the Civil War. He was involved in the Constitutional Convention of 1867 in the state of Virginia, for example, and pushed forward a number of progressive reforms. I'll show you one of his letters that he wrote during the war. He also corresponded with the Anglo-African newspaper, which I'll get to in a second. So we have a biography that I believe I wrote the Taylor biography. This is a pretty robust biography. And then just coming down here, we have primary sources. So for those soldiers or people in the database who have primary sources related to them, we have a list of them all right here. Taylor is atypical in the sense that we have a lot of primary sources for him, and then at the bottom we just have all that information from the essay is repeated in database form. Basically, it lets you see what you saw. Just kind of shows you what's driving that search. Taylor was actually not born in Albemarle, but he lived most of his life in Albemarle. Moved to Albemarle before the Civil War, and so is included in our project. If we go to another way to explore the data, to explore the website, as opposed to searching for people from, say, the 55th of Massachusetts or certain surnames and things like that, is you can go into our Atlas section, and we have two maps, interactive maps, one of enlistment places and one of muster out places. Let me go into the enlistment places first. And what it does is it aggregates the points on the map, the enlistment places, at a high level, but as you zoom in, they start to come out like this. And you're going to see there are tons of people enlisting in Missouri. Liz alluded to that earlier. You're going to see we have people enlisting up here in the state of Michigan. We have people up here in Boston, up in Rhode Island. We've got people in Tennessee and along the Mississippi River, a few people along the eastern coast as well. And this is really illustrates to me the fact that these men were dispersed by the slave trade, by wholesale moves of entire plantations out to Missouri, to places with more land than the state of Virginia had in the 1850s. And a lot of these folks who are enlisting here, like in the state of Ohio, for example, well, state law was designed to keep the free black population low, to avoid basically a possible slave revolt. They thought that the free African Americans would be leaders of those kinds of revolts. So they were forced to move to the north, to Pennsylvania and to Ohio and places like that. If you click on an individual point, we can see John Reed here, who enlisted in Morrow County, Ohio. And you can click right on John and go right to his biography.
Willie, I'm glad you're doing that. This is a fascinating story. I was going to bring him up. I'm glad you're going to get the high points of this guy. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and this is one of the interesting cases where we actually have a large manumission event. I'm not sure that's the best way to say it, but
Absolutely.
John Bowles moves up to Ohio with all of his slaves, buys them land, and sets them up with their own farms. And he sort of disappears from the historical record after the 1850 census or so. I can't remember how. I lost track of him. I'm not sure what happened to him. I haven't found him yet. But there's another story like this. Charles D. Everett, who was one of the attending physicians for Jefferson, came to support the emancipation of his own slaves, at least, and set all of his slaves free. And his nephew, who was also named Charles D. Everett, apparently they weren't very creative with names in that family, Charles Everett, was supposed to settle all these slaves who grew up near Monticello, basically, and lived near in the Monticello area in Liberia. But he decided that the best place for them was to go up to a planned community called Pandinarium in Mercer County. I think that's south central Pennsylvania, Mercer County, Pennsylvania, and set them up with money and with land. And local abolitionists actually built them houses and stores and things like this, so that when they came, there was actually a town waiting for them.
Let me jump in there. I mean, those are, they're fascinating stories, and again, shows we have most of those Black Union soldiers were men who had fled slavery, but we do have representatives of the proportion of the USCT that was free Blacks. And one of the things that's so remarkable on this theme of journeys, to build on what Will is saying, is that these men who may have made it to freedom by running to Union lines, or may have, against all odds, these manumission stories are remarkable, but also exceedingly unusual, needless to say, very, very rare. Against all odds, a master frees a group of slaves and sets them up in Ohio or Pennsylvania, almost non-existent events, but they happened at times. For those men to risk that freedom and go back into the maw of slavery to try to free others, that's what happens. And some of the men who had made it to Ohio and made it to Pennsylvania, had a chance to start new lives, they're willingly returning to the South, risking death, re-enslavement, and so on. So again, it makes those journeys all the more remarkable. Giving up a hard-earned freedom, risking a hard-earned freedom, or a hard-won freedom in that way.
Yes. Very atypical.
Real quickly, again, what this site does, it brings again to the forefront these micro histories that often I think people dismiss because they get caught up. Oh, was this really typical? Which of course is a tired and I think almost a pointless question, because what these micro histories do is they destabilize these dominant narratives that we have. And again, Liz and Will, you've already pointed out a number of things that I don't think that we often consider when we think about USCT regiments, for example. We don't really think about where they come from. We don't think about the trajectory of them being slaves. And Will, again, if this is a difficult thing to do, then don't do it. But one of the pension applications that I found to be really powerful, and would like for both of you to comment about this particular testimony, and then talk about these petitions, or I should say pension applications, and what they can do for us. And so the one that I found it absolutely heartbreaking, is for the soldier William Evans.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Would you mind, you all, letting our folks at home, you can read it to them if you like. I think there is a transcription, of course. And then you guys can just comment about this particular case study and what questions come out of this, and talk about the pension process if you like as well.
Yes. So this, you're talking about William Evans is actually, one of the very few. Almost all of our men were enslaved at the start of the war, but he was one of the few free African American men who was sent to live with his family in Ohio to leave Albemarle, and left his mother behind. And then he enlisted in the what became the 5th USCT, and he was killed during the war. And his mother filed a pension application stating that he had been her sole means of support, and so she needed a pension to support her now that her son was gone. And this is something that a lot of parents did, who they would apply for a pension if they were reliant on their deceased son who died during the war. And the pension agency basically says, well, there's no proof that you were dependent on him, because there are no payments or anything. And the thing is she was behind the enemy lines. She was behind the Confederate lines, and so there was obviously no way for him to be paying her or sending money to her during the war. And so as a result of this technicality, they said, no, you're not going to get a pension. We don't believe you were dependent upon your son. Liz, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, again, just as you said, Pete, heartbreaking, because you see his mother is struggling to make a living in post-war Charlottesville. He enlisted as a teenager, claimed he was older than he was, died at such young age. He hadn't had a chance to establish himself, as a source of financial support for his mother. And as Will is suggesting, these pension records are incredibly rich. A soldier had to prove their identity, had to offer testimony about their wartime experience, how they had incurred the disability for which they were asking for coverage. In the case of many families, it's not the soldier applying, but a widow or a dependent parent. So we have many, many women's voices, both as those requesting pension support and testifying on behalf of friends and family to legitimize their stories. And there were, so some of these files are hundreds of pages of intimate testimony from family members, comrades in arms, employers, and so on, and doctors, endless medical testimony. Obviously, there were, all kinds of structural impediments for these USCT soldiers to be successful in getting a pension. The initial policy was you had to prove that you could trace the disability to wartime itself. The government in 1890 expanded eligibility to cover all those who were disabled, not only by war-incurred wounds, but or disabilities, but you got higher payments if you could trace that disability to the war. So there's a lot of built-in problems there for Black soldiers in particular, who disproportionately are afflicted by and die of disease, sometimes harder to prove, that your war-incurred rheumatism or whatever is the reason your health and well-being have declined, as opposed to an empty sleeve or a more obvious sign of a wound. Pension agents were sometimes frequently unsympathetic and racist. African-American soldiers had often used aliases, enlisted under an alias, so a master wouldn't track them down, or chose a new name so they could cast off a master assigned name once they were free. They often didn't have paper proving marriages, for example, because under slavery, the possible or former officers, and the system was so, one just striking thing. This point is not original to me. Scholars of pension records have noted this, but it's really striking that the whole system forced some of these soldiers into a kind of dissemblance, in the sense that to prove that your disability was incurred in the war. You had to claim you were in perfect health when the war started. And of course, for men who've been enslaved and subjected to again, the horrors, the deprivations, the backbreaking work, and so on, the risks of a life in slavery, to have to claim they were in perfect health to be at the start of the war, when their health may have already been quite compromised at that point, was just a sign that there were some issues with this process. That said, and Will can follow up here, our particular group was very successful in getting pensions, and so we have hundreds of pension records to consult, and sometimes they were successful because they were just incredibly resourceful. In the case of a family named the Garland family, the wife of a soldier whose mental and physical health had declined applied for an increase in his pension on his behalf, since he was not really able to do so anymore. And after being sort of refused by the pension bureau, she hired a famous black clubwoman suffragist pension lawyer named Jeanette Carter, who's was one of those kind of women in the vanguard of the black feminist movement of the late 19th century, and Washington, D.C. based journalist as well, Jeanette Carter. And with Jeanette Carter's help, she was able to successfully get the government to raise the pension, but it required oftentimes really, decades of effort and allies, and sometimes the allies could become, one could come by the allies. Sometimes that was very difficult, especially if you were in a remote rural spot in the deep South and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it was very, very apparent to us that the soldiers were much more successful than you would expect in getting pensions, and their widows were, as well as were their dependent children and parents too. The Donald Schaefer wrote a wonderful book called After the Glory, which looks at Black veterans after the Civil War. And according to his study, he thought that he found that only about 75% of Black soldier or sailor applicants were successful in getting pensions, but 93% of our men got pensions when they applied. The numbers for the widows is also higher than Donald Schaefer's. In fact, actually, our men were more successful in getting pensions than the white control group in Donald Schaefer's study. So, and I think that speaks to what Liz was talking about, that they were incredibly resourceful. And also, we had a large concentration of soldiers from Missouri that we've mentioned already. And you can really see that community that had been formerly enslaved on the one or two plantations in central Missouri coming together and all testifying on behalf of each other. Soldiers, spouses, cousins, neighbors, everybody came in and pitched in. And one of the really cool things, I think, looking at the pensions is it allows you to get beyond just thinking about the war or dry military facts that you get from service records. We were pretty much able to recreate that community without any kind of records from the plantation by just looking at the pension records and looking at how that community banded together to get those pensions. Sorry, this is slightly off topic, but I mean, I think the other reason that we see these men were so successful is because, I mean, they served in some of the worst places in the war. They were trained in Benton Barracks, which was an awful place for recruits. They served in Morganza, Louisiana, which was just an awful place with lots of casualties, lots of deaths from disease during the war amongst Black troops. And so those that survived, unfortunately, they had suffered so much that they had a good case for a pension because, I mean, it was just, there was just a lot of perseverance, but also they suffered too for their decision to enlist. It was not an easy one for them. Along those lines, I should mention that, of the 250 soldiers who enlisted, 72 of them died during the war. 72 of them, it's 28% of our soldiers died during the war. which is higher than the overall USCT figure, which I believe is 18%. So our Albemarle soldiers really paid, that final sacrifice. They really put their lives on the line to save the Union and end slavery.
I'm glad that you brought up that point about community, because it took entire communities, even for white soldiers, to get these pensions over the finish line, and all of the different documents that have to come in, especially for people of who were illiterate or came from very poor backgrounds, or they're immigrants. So there's a language barrier there. So the need for community for these Black veterans, or the widows and families of these Black soldiers, would definitely be huge. I'm kind of curious, a two-part question going off of that. What did you all find in terms of the white allies that these people could rely on, in terms of who do they turn to who might have some position of power, a white officer, in command of a USCT regiment, who might go to bat for these guys? How frequent was that? And who are kind of their white supporters who do kind of step in and say, I want to make sure that, this passes muster. And a second part to that question is, for the women, the widows of these soldiers, I imagine that having that pension and, it's obviously a financial help, but it also is an official testament to their own kind of linkage to a patriotic cause, which would prop them up in the views of a lot of white people, that your husband fought and died for the Union. And so I would think that would give them a certain more privileged status, or maybe a more respected status. I'm not sure if you've found that in the case of your studies or not.
Go
ahead, Liz. I'll speak to the first one, Liz. I think in that the primary white allies that were useful in pensions were local congressmen. So the local congressmen getting on the case of the pension agency, trying to figure out what was going on. Those were probably the most successful. We only have, I can only remember a few cases where a white officer testifies. And in one case, it was unfortunate because he didn't remember the soldier. So so I was like, it tracked him all the way down to Massachusetts. But so the white allies in those pension records are, definitely kind of hit or miss, and often unreliable, honestly.
Yeah, I found the same thing in the ones that I've looked at. That doctors, sometimes there were sympathetic doctors in communities who had been the family doctor of someone for a long period in freedom. The obviously help from a congressman was much more forthcoming for those who were living in the North after the war than those living in the South. But I also was curious. It's a great question. I was curious about how often white USCT officers stepped in, and our sample, not very often, again, because maybe they were hard to track down, but it just underscores a point we were making earlier and goes to themes, again, Pete has written about so eloquently in terms of soldier motivation, that it was the bonds with their this kind of small unit cohesion with their men and their companies, and it's the men and their companies who vouch for these soldiers, who do stand as surrogate families for them, and who do most of that work of testifying. With regard to women, I think within African American communities in various places, obviously being a veteran and related to a veteran was a point of pride, but we see sometimes in the pension records a frustration that's not reflected back to them by the official bureaucracy. So in the case of the Garland family I began to describe, of the widow having to ask for an increase in the pension for the mentally disabled as well as physically disabled veteran husband, she struggles and struggles. Finally, her son, who's a very prominent businessman in Cleveland, writes the local congressman, just as Will said, to ask for help. And his letter is so plaintive. He basically says, how can a widow who's 77 years old, who, as he puts it, and I quote him, whose husband fought in a revolution, be getting so little respect from you people? You're just being given the runaround. So we see there's sometimes sympathetic figures in these bureaucracies, but very often that's not the case, and therefore you have these long struggles, and the struggles could be costly. Again, having to contract with agents and lawyers and people to help one file the immense amounts of paperwork that were necessary. In the case of this Garland family, though there was a long record of applications to the pension office, when the veteran finally dies, I think in 1918, and the widow wants a widow's pension now that he's dead, they say, oh, sorry, you don't have your wedding certificate from 1863. The pension file is already hundreds of pages at that point. They have a record of her being his caretaker. But, so she goes and finds people who were there in Mercer County in 1863 who were there at the wedding. But you can imagine the son is like, are you kidding me? So there's really, it's very sobering. But again, the pension records themselves, again, are just, as Will said, endlessly rich social history sources. And I have to say, somewhat embarrassed to say, I didn't realize this myself until very recently. I hadn't worked in these records until this project. And now, I'm just, I feel that they're this treasure trove.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And they also do what Will said, is that they remind us that when we think about the Civil War, that these chronological boundaries that we have always used, that they're so porous, and we need to just simply remove them, that the war continues. And we've had so many, I think, really important discussions with authors on this show that remind us how far the field has come in terms of the integration of social and military and political history. We had someone on a few weeks ago, and they mentioned that the person who taught an introductory class, I won't mention the institution now, I think the person's maybe even retired, said at the very beginning of the class, a Civil War class, I don't do military history. And I thought, what, if I did a Civil War class and I said to folks, we're just going to do battles and generals, and I don't do gender and I don't do race, I would rightfully be discredited. And so I think that, Will, what you said, and Liz, what you've said as well, that, this project and where the field is now, thankfully, we're at a place where I think we have an integration of all these pieces together.
Yeah, and it permits us to see things that we didn't see before. I mean, again, I do want to say a few words in part to motivate people to watch the rollout that's coming on May 4th about the UVA Unionist project. Again, talk about something flying under the radar screen. While the UVA as an institution did all sorts of things to celebrate the Confederate students, there was radio silence on the Unionists from UVA, so much so that the consensus when Will got here was that there were no UVA Unionists. So again, the resourcefulness of Will and of Brian Newman and others to find that there were dozens that they represent the spectrum of white Southern unionism. Some were by the standards of the time progressives who were really anti-slavery, who supported radical Reconstruction. Some were pro-slavery unionists who believed secession would destroy slavery, and that was the grounds for their unionism, and who opposed radical Reconstruction tooth and nail. Most were somewhere in the middle, searching for some kind of pragmatic, accommodations. But we learned an immense amount from them. I was blown away when Brian discovered that Henry Winter Davis of the famous Wade Davis bill, radical Republican from Maryland, pushes through Maryland's Emancipation Act and is a bit of a thorn in Lincoln's side as a critic from his left, as it were. He was a UVA law student. This is the kind of this is the kind of thing that we just didn't know. And you conceive of the local history in a different way if you know these things.
Sure. Do we have time for just a couple of quick questions?
Sure.
I know that we're close to our finish, but I did want to get some of the audience feedback involved. A quick one, really quick one for you, Will. Could you list the website for the Founding Fathers? So you can just type that into the chat box. We can post that there. We have a question about pockets of Southern sympathizers in the North, whether we think that they're about the same size, and in terms of the robustness of that community, Southern sympathizers in the North versus Southern Unionists in the South, or whether there is a disparity even there, that there were more Southern Unionists than there were Southern sympathizers living up north. I don't know if you all can speculate.
Well, I mean, if we understand that African Americans in the South wanted the Union to win, then there are many more Southern Unionists in the South than
Sure.
Confederate sympathizers in the North. Many more. But the question is still a very good one, because it points to the difficulty of sorting out these categories. On the Southern side, the difficulty of telling the difference between an anti-administration Confederate, someone who wants the Confederacy to win but believes the Davis administration is going about it in the wrong way, and a Unionist who wants the Union to win, can sometimes be tricky, because the lines between those things can blur. People could be, political opportunists and pose as one thing and switch allegiances and so on. Likewise, in the North, the difficulty, or the analogous difficulty, is telling the difference between critics of the Lincoln administration who wanted the Union to win but believed Lincoln was going about it in the wrong way, and those voices of dissent in the North who really I wanted the Union to lose or were willing to concede Confederate independence. And, for historians, and Will has written brilliantly on all this in his work on Catholics, this is the difference between the sort of Copperhead extreme and war Democrats. And it's important not to conflate, not to mistake dissent about the means from different ends. I'm sure Will could add to that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a book by David Zimring, To Live and Die in Dixie, I believe, that gets at some of this question of, Southern support up in the North, or Northerners who moved south and ended up on the Confederate side of things. But Liz, you said it pretty well. So
yeah. I mean, to be sure, there are some Copperheads who talk as though they would be willing to accept Confederate independence, and Confederates imagine that they are allies, but that never materializes in a way that's
right.
They're allies who want to stay on the sidelines.
Right.
Yeah.
They hope this thing ends, and they would, like you said, they wouldn't care. Although there is, again, some wonderful work that I've seen of late. And I'll just mention one thing in particular, and it's the Standard Letters. William Standard, and I forgot her name. They're published by Kent State. And for anyone who's interested in that voice that comes not just from the home front, but also from soldiers, the Standard Letters, published by Kent State, they hate Lincoln, hate all Republicans. They are rabid racist. He ends up in the Army, and that doesn't really soften his political stance. But it is so hard, as we all know, to find those voices from the Midwest, right? And it's
right. And I mean, all of these projects, part of the goal here is to say this political spectrum is wide, and we have to understand all of the different positions on it, and not overgeneralize in a way that flattens those differences.
Well, I hope that our audience will join you all again. The unveiling of your project on Unionists will be next week. Yes. And
May 4th. Mm-hmm.
Can you say it again, Will? May 4th?
May 4th at 7 p.m. See our website.
Just go to your website as well. We should also note that the Nau Center does a wide range of programming throughout the year. They do stuff, of course, online. And I suspect that now that COVID is, probably in 6 months or so, it'll be mostly in our rearview mirror, that the Nau Center will start doing some things out on the battlefield that they've always done as well. But, what you've shared with us tonight, it reminds me of something what Liz just said recently, that she's like, I never realized that these pension records were so rich and could recover for us stories that, and here's where I feel like an old timer, I didn't think they were ever recoverable. I didn't think that we could find them, but like Robert Penn Warren said, and all the King's Men, right? There's always something out there. And that's true. There's always something out there. And we are blessed that the two of you, as well as your students and the staff at the Nau Center, have invested so much time and so much energy and resources to be able to make these stories available to us. And I encourage everyone to get on that little, get on the site and to use the search engine. And I did it today. I had a hell of a good time just plugging in different things, and these stories coming to the surface. They're powerful and they're meaningful, and remind everyone that this isn't stories that are on the periphery. This is at the very heart of what this war was about. So again, thank you both for this. And I want to say, Will, congratulations on your Rosecrans manuscript that it's finished. That's a massive achievement, as we all know.
Thank you, Pete.
It's really huge.
All looking forward to it.
Liz, again, but Liz, what I failed to ask you, was so focused on all your books and on the Lincoln Prize. How are your Washington Capitals doing this year?
I mean, I'm just, it's all about soccer for me.
It's all soccer now.
It's just all about soccer. I grew up in Northern Virginia, so I'm a fan of all things Washington, D.C. sports, but
Who's your team soccer? Is it just women's soccer?
Tottenham Hotspur, which is not a good thing right now.
I love that they have a wonderful show. Maybe you've seen it on, I think it's on Amazon Prime. Have you seen it? They follow the sport.
Yes. Yeah. So, fascinating.
Ashley's husband, Brian Lusky, teaches at WVU. He's a serious soccer fan, and I irritate him in many ways. But one way is I tell him I change my teams. And when Amazon has a team I like to look at, I'd love the Spurs coach, although I think he maybe just got fired, didn't he?
He just got fired, yeah. I have favorite teams and favorite players, and just, quite fanatical.
I switch from year to year. I don't have, but so I'm not. I went to my class yesterday, and had two students arguing vigorously about NHL soccer. One was a Caps fan. She was adamant that they were a superior team to the club in Miami, and I can tell you that I never imagined that I would ever see in my classroom two people care enough about NHL hockey in this country to actually get into an argument about it.
I mean, the big message here, of course, we're just so happy to have sports back. The early days of the pandemic, when we didn't even have sports, oh my, that was tough. It's just, I'm really glad it's back.
Yeah. Well, it's been so wonderful to have both of you with us again. We appreciate your commentary tonight. Looking forward to, again, digging into the sites on unionism. And again, also very appreciative of this great scholarship that you've done for all of us. And to have Ashley with us. Ashley, we have our last show is coming up. And I'm going to use a little terminology here. Ashley is my partner in crime. She's right across the hall from me in CWI. And so I'm always coming up with different lingo to try to sound young. So we have you have to look this up, Ashley. We have an OG in 2 weeks. That OG is Ken No. You know what I mean by OG? It's what NBA basketball players say. You have to look it up, Ashley.
No idea.
No idea. You have to look it up. So Ken is coming, and he's speaking about his book on weather.
Oh, wonderful! I will definitely tune into that. That's fascinating work. What an exciting field that is.
And that won't be next weekend. I'm sorry, next Wednesday. It will be
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from now, and that will be our last show.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you,
guys.
Have a great end to the semester as well.
Same to you. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.